In 1970s Harlem, one businessman dared to ask the important question, what if organized crime, but with better tailoring? Introducing Frank's completely legit import and export company. That's right, folks. Need suspiciously expensive teak furniture? We got it. Need military duffel bags nobody should legally be touching? We got it. Need a guy in a giant fur coat explaining international logistics while definitely being followed by 12 federal agencies? Buddy, we really got it. At Frank's completely legit import and export company, we specialize in overseas connections, questionable shipping manifests, extremely nervous accountants, heroin purity levels that alarm medical professionals, and enough corruption to make the NYPD start sweating through their suits. But wait. Order now and receive your very own Disco Dracula Executive Fashion Package. Includes one chinchilla coat, one matching hat, one deeply paranoid facial expression, and 3 unmarked surveillance vehicles absolutely free. And remember, at Frank's completely legit import and export company, we don't just ruin neighborhoods. We do it with style. Frank's completely legit import and export company is not responsible for federal indictments, wiretaps, international narcotics investigations, Vietnam-era conspiracy theories, fur-related ego inflation, or dramatic Denzel Washington walk sequences. Side effects may include RICO charges, asset forfeiture, extreme paranoia, and believing your life deserves orchestral background music. If your criminal empire lasts longer than 4 hours, please contact a defense attorney immediately. Frank's completely legit import and export company. The truth is probably worse than the movie. Sponsored unofficially by Pizza vs. Studios, the only documentary company brave enough to ask, hey, maybe the heroin kingpin wasn't the good guy?
A Pizzaverse Studios documentary, a Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Frank Lucas. The Myth, the Movie, and the Heroin Empire.
Disclaimer. The following documentary is intended for educational, historical, psychological, cinematic, and Hollywood lied to your face again purposes only. All information presented is based on public interviews, historical records, journalism, court documents, old school street mythology, and the kind of gangster storytelling where every guy somehow claims he personally invented organized crime while wearing a fur coat the size of a Buick. No heroin shipments, fake military uniforms, teak furniture smuggling operations, or suspiciously heavy coffins were federally approved during the making of this documentary. Pizzaverse Studios would also like to remind viewers that just because somebody looks cool walking slowly through Harlem with dramatic music playing behind them does not automatically make them a strategic genius. Sometimes it just means Hollywood found a talented actor and a good soundtrack. And as always, the Pizzaverse does not rewrite history. We excavated.
There are gangster stories. And then there are American gangster stories. The difference matters. Because once Hollywood gets involved, reality gets buried underneath tailored suits, cinematic lighting, slow motion walks, dramatic violin music, and enough exaggerated nonsense to make 3 retired mobsters fistfight inside a Newark diner parking lot. Frank Lucas became one of the most mythologized drug traffickers in American history, largely because of one thing. Denzel Washington played him. And once Denzel Washington plays you, congratulations. You are now permanently cooler than reality itself. The film American Gangster painted Lucas as a criminal mastermind who bypassed the mafia, built a heroin empire from Southeast Asia, corrupted half the NYPD, outsmarted the federal government, and somehow carried himself like the CEO of Cocaine Incorporated. But the deeper you dig into Frank Lucas, the stranger the story becomes. Because almost every major part of the legend is disputed by somebody. Bumpy Johnson's family disputed him. Former associates disputed him. Law enforcement disputed him. Journalists disputed him. Even Frank Lucas sometimes disputed Frank Lucas. One interview, he'd say one thing. Another interview, he'd say something completely different. The man told stories the way old gamblers play blackjack. Confidently. Aggressively. And usually while ignoring basic mathematics. But that's what makes Frank Lucas fascinating. Frank Lucas lived in the space where rumor and reality fed each other. In some neighborhoods, he was spoken about like a king, in others like a warning. He was not a hero, and he was not misunderstood. He was a man who turned violence into business, and business into a story people wanted to believe. The city around him was already wounded. Heroin moved through streets like a slow fire, quietly taking families apart one by one. Mothers looked for sons who were already drifting away. Brothers disappeared into need. Apartment hallways carried the smell of fear, exhaustion, and medicine that never healed anything. Lucas understood that fear could be organized. He understood that if a man dressed well, spoke calmly, and moved with confidence, people would mistake discipline for legitimacy. He built his image carefully, wrapping brutality in the language of respectability. Fur coats, polished cars, imported suits, and the attitude of a businessman created a mask that made his crimes easier for others to romanticize. That was the trick of it. He was not just selling drugs. He was selling an illusion. He knew America loved a criminal with style, a villain who looked like he belonged in a frame. The more cinematic his image became, the more the real damage vanished behind the spectacle. But nothing about the damage was abstract to the people living in it. The money from the trade did not stay clean. It spread into broken homes, funerals, debts, and prison cells. Every polished surface sat on top of a pile of suffering. For every whispered legend about his power, there were neighborhoods absorbing the consequences. And like many men who build empires on poison, Lucas was eventually trapped by the world he helped create. The myth outlived the man in some places, but in the streets the memory was different. There, his name did not sound glamorous. It sounded like an invoice paid in grief. That is the darker truth under the movie version. The legend exists because people are drawn to charisma, but the real story is smaller and harsher. It is about addiction, exploitation, and the ease with which style can be mistaken for substance. It is about how one man's myth could stand upright only because so many other lives were made to fall. Bumpy Johnson's death. Hollywood invents a scene. One of the biggest myths in American Gangster involves the death of Harlem crime boss Bumpy Johnson. The film gives us this emotional cinematic moment where Bumpy dies in Frank's arms inside an appliance store while emotionally ranting about Harlem changing around him. Beautiful scene. Completely ridiculous. In reality, Bumpy Johnson died in 1968 while eating at Wells Restaurant on Lenox Avenue in New York. No dramatic final speech. No touching Hollywood farewell. No cinematic passing of the torch. According to Bumpy's wife, Mamie Johnson, Frank Lucas wasn't even there. She said Bumpy died alongside his longtime friend Junie Bird, not Frank Lucas. That matters because American Gangster tries to build the mythology that Frank inherited Harlem directly from Bumpy, like some criminal Lion King storyline. Reality: Frank may have known Bumpy. He may have driven him occasionally. But according to people actually close to Bumpy, Frank was nowhere near as important as the movie suggests. Hollywood basically took guy who occasionally carried a coat and upgraded him into trusted underboss heir to the throne. That's not historical accuracy. That's resume inflation with a soundtrack. The driver story doesn't even make sense. The movie claims Frank spent 15 years as Bumpy Johnson's trusted driver and right-hand man. Tiny problem. The timeline is nonsense. Bumpy was only out of prison from 1963 until his death in 1968. That's 5 years. Not 15. Which means the math collapses faster than a mob social club after a federal RICO indictment. Mamie Johnson openly dismissed the entire narrative. She admitted Frank may have driven Bumpy a few times, but insisted he wasn't some deeply trusted consigliere-level figure. To Bumpy, Frank was just another guy around the neighborhood. But Hollywood loves mentorship stories, especially criminal mentorship stories. America has a weird obsession with gangster apprenticeships. Every crime movie eventually turns into Karate Kid with heroin. You carry my coat now, kid. Next thing you know, montage music, fur coats, Vietnam connections, and somebody's getting murdered in slow motion outside a nightclub.
Tony 911 Pizza Voodoo Doll. When the clowning becomes an emergency. Big old Batman tee stretched across the chest. Silver Maltese cross necklace hanging loud like he stole it from a flea market. Glasses slightly crooked. Hair spiked like he stuck a fork in the outlet. Little stitched mouth shaped like he's about to whine. Comes with tiny pins labeled lies, fake stories, 911, transmission, and con man energy. Tony 911 Pizza Voodoo Doll MobTube Emergency Edition. Tired of hearing bogus stories? Want a little peace and quiet? Give this doll a poke and watch the clownery crumble. Perfect for pizzaverse citizens, truth seekers, and anyone who ever heard Tony say bro in the middle of a lie. Warning, doll may call the cops on you after repeated use. Ladies and gents, you ever met a man who lies so bad you wish you had a mute button? Well, guess what? We made one. Introducing the Tony 911 Pizza Voodoo Doll. Comes fully equipped with a Batman tee, a Maltese cross necklace, and the ability to disappoint you on command. Order now and get a free bottle of Forget About It oil for when you gotta cleanse your house of fake wise guys.
The Golden Triangle and 07. Now here's where the story gets weird enough that parts of it might actually be true. Frank claimed he traveled into Southeast Asia and met a mysterious heroin supplier known only as Joe 7. Because apparently every major drug operation in the 1970s required at least one guy who sounded like a rejected James Bond villain. According to Frank, he visited the Golden Triangle, where Thailand, Burma, and Laos meet, and personally witnessed massive opium fields stretching for miles. He even claimed he disguised himself as a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel during these trips. Frank bragged, "You should have seen me. I could really salute." And honestly, that sentence alone sounds like somebody's drunk uncle trying to impress strangers at a barbecue after 3 whiskey sours and a head injury. Still, parts of the overseas connection story appear credible. The heroin trade during the Vietnam era absolutely involved military corruption. Southeast Asian suppliers, transport networks, and organized criminal connections. But historians still debate exactly how deeply Frank himself was involved internationally. Like most Frank Lucas stories, the truth probably exists somewhere between. Criminal mastermind and guy exaggerating aggressively during interviews. The coffin myth. Then we arrive at the most infamous part of the Frank Lucas mythology, the coffin story. American Gangster made audiences believe Frank smuggled heroin inside the coffins of dead American soldiers returning from Vietnam. That detail horrified people. And Frank himself encouraged the legend for years. At times, he bragged about false bottom coffins. Later, he partially walked the story back. Meanwhile, Leslie Ike Atkinson, one of Frank's alleged associates, denied the entire thing. According to Atkinson, heroin was smuggled through military luggage and teak furniture instead. So now you've got conflicting stories from the criminals themselves, which means somebody's lying. Maybe everybody's lying. Welcome to organized crime history, where every interview sounds like a mixture of truth, ego, self-preservation, and performance art. Still, the coffin story became legendary because it symbolized something horrifying: profiting off war, addiction, and death all at once. Even by drug war standards, it sounded monstrous. And Hollywood knew exactly how powerful that image would be. The sidewalk execution. One of the movie's most brutal scenes shows Frank casually murdering a rival dealer named Tango in broad daylight. That scene came directly from Frank's own stories. Frank claimed Tango was a feared enforcer and said, "I killed the baddest man not just in Harlem, but in the world." Very subtle. Frank. Completely normal sentence. Not dramatic at all. The problem? There's almost no evidence backing the story up. No murder charge. No official confirmation. No strong documentation. Later in life, Frank even softened parts of the story himself, which raises an important question. Was Frank Lucas a dangerous criminal? Absolutely. Was he also actively building his own mythology? Without question. Gangsters often understand something Hollywood eventually learns too. Fear sells. Legend sells. Reputation becomes currency. And sometimes criminals exaggerate violence because mythology itself becomes protection. If everybody believes you're capable of anything, half the battle's already won. Blue magic. Now let's talk about the heroin itself. Blue magic became legendary because of its purity. Frank's operation allegedly brought heroin into the country at nearly 98% purity before it was diluted for street sales. Even after dilution, it was still dramatically stronger than most heroin available at the time. Street heroin often sat around 1% to 3% purity. Blue magic hit like a freight train. And the consequences were catastrophic. Overdoses exploded. Addiction spread rapidly. Communities were devastated. This is where gangster mythology becomes dangerous. Movies show luxury, power, money, fur coats, Cadillacs, fancy restaurants. They rarely show the addicts vomiting in apartments, the families collapsing, the bodies in alleyways, the neighborhoods being hollowed out from the inside. Drug kingpins love being remembered as businessmen. The victims rarely get movie deals. Richie Roberts and the Hollywood Hero Machine. Richie Roberts, played by Russell Crowe, became the moral centerpiece of American Gangster. And to be fair, parts of his story are true. He really did turn in a huge amount of dirty money instead of stealing it. That genuinely happened. But Hollywood exaggerated the isolation and drama around him. The movie presents Roberts like he's Gotham City's last honest detective, wandering through a swamp of corruption, completely alone. Reality was more complicated. Roberts worked as part of a larger investigative team. There was no legendary one-on-one rivalry with Frank Lucas. No dramatic chess match relationship. No, you and me are the same movie nonsense. That's screenplay simplification. Hollywood loves reducing massive investigations into one hero versus one villain because audiences understand clean narratives better than complicated reality. Truth is messy. Movies hate messy. The fur coat that helped destroy him. Now this part actually happened. Frank's wife, Julie, bought him the famous chinchilla coat and matching hat. And yes, the outfit drew attention. Law enforcement already knew who Frank was before the boxing match scene. But the flashy appearance absolutely didn't help. Frank later admitted the coat was a mistake, which honestly feels like the understatement of the century. If your life goal is avoid federal attention, dressing like Liberace inherited Pablo Escobar's wardrobe is probably not the strategy. The man walked into a boxing match looking like Dracula won the lottery at Studio 54. Even other gangsters were probably sitting there going, "Tone it down, Paisan." Total clown move. The real cost of the myth? American Gangster softened Frank Lucas considerably. The movie gives him intelligence, dignity, discipline, and almost a code of ethics. Reality, far uglier. Frank admitted to extreme violence. He openly discussed bribing police officers. He confessed to blowing up a corrupt cop's car. His heroin empire contributed to catastrophic addiction waves across American cities. And while Hollywood turned him into a stylish anti-hero, real people buried family members. That's the part gangster mythology always struggles with. The bodies outside the frame. The addiction outside the soundtrack. The communities left behind after the flashy criminals either die, disappear, cooperate, or reinvent themselves as elderly street historians on YouTube podcasts wearing leather jackets, while pretending they were misunderstood philosophers. By the end of his life, Frank Lucas tried reshaping his legacy through community outreach and family projects with his daughter Francine. But the mythology had already escaped him. Hollywood immortalized Frank Lucas permanently, not necessarily as he was, but as America prefers its gangsters. Charismatic, stylish, complicated, and cinematic enough to make audiences forget what heroin actually does to human beings. Frank Lucas died on May 30th, 2019 at age 88. Natural causes. Which feels almost surreal considering the destruction surrounding his life story. But maybe that's the strangest part of organized crime mythology. The legends survive. The victims usually don't. Frank Lucas became one of the last great American crime myths because he existed at the perfect intersection of truth and performance. A real criminal. A real empire. Real corruption. Real violence. Wrapped inside stories so exaggerated, contradictory, and cinematic that even historians still argue about where reality ends and mythology begins. And Hollywood polished the entire thing into entertainment. That's what America does best. We take monsters, put orchestral music behind them, cast beautiful actors, dim the lighting, and suddenly audiences start confusing destruction with greatness. But behind every gangster legend is usually the same ugly truth. Addiction. Fear. Bodies. Ruined neighborhoods. Broken families. The camera rarely lingers there. The Pizzaverse does. If you enjoyed this documentary, welcome to the Pizzaverse Social Club, where history gets pulled apart like FBI evidence boxes in a smoke-filled back room somewhere in Newark. We cover the stories Hollywood sanitizes, the criminals mythology romanticizes, and the uncomfortable truths most documentaries are too scared to touch. Mob history, drug empires, Hollywood corruption, internet insanity, forgotten scandals, old world ghosts hiding underneath modern America. Subscribe to Pizzaverse Studios, because around here, we don't worship legends. We investigate them. Special thanks to everybody watching from their couch, pretending they definitely would have resisted the temptation of millions of dollars. International heroin trafficking. Corrupt cops. Tailored suits. And enough cash to buy 3 discos and a tiger. Sure you would have, sweetheart. We'd also like to thank Hollywood for continuing its proud tradition of turning horrifying historical criminals into complex, misunderstood businessmen every 6 years like cinematic clockwork. And finally, thank you to the viewers of the Pizzaverse, the only corner of the internet where organized crime history, sarcasm, psychological collapse, movie criticism, espresso, and existential dread all somehow live under the same roof like a deeply dysfunctional Italian family arguing over Sunday gravy. Until next time, stay dangerous, stay skeptical, and remember, the Pizzaverse always wins.
Black. 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 Black.
Hello friends, it's me Giacomo at Giacomo A on the YouTube. So anyway, when I am not on the Facebook groups begging for views, subs and people to buy my books, I am here with you, begging with you to buy my books. Because JJ Lambon and Elisa Pizza Piescia, Pizzitola, damaged my books. Bambi Palermo did too. So anyways, buy the books, please. I am begging.
Hello friends. Join me tonight on my YouTube channel at Giacomo A to hear my story about the underworld 80s mobsters.
A good father, 2 sons and a daughter, but he wakes up and he asks himself, why even bother if he cannot feed his family? The wage he's paid's insanity. Every day he's dealing with a new calamity. Lost his old occupation, but it wasn't immigration. It was a machine, automation that replaced him. Politicians left him corruption since the recession. So he grabs his Smith & Wesson, says he'll teach him all the lesson. Like, get down on the ground. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington. His pension, sunk into depression. Congress is defecting, it's been adding to the tension. Came back from war and he's been post-traumatic stressing. Can't afford his medicine he took for his aggression. He needs help, relying on a system that rejects him. Took away his benefits but left him with this weapon. But a one-way ticket, he's entering the thicket to do the only thing that he's thinking will make a difference. Like, down on the ground. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington. There's a cold wind blowing, I'm just warning and preparing ya. There's a